Hello and welcome to the Parisienne stick in the swill-bucket rattles back. Sorry about that. So a couple of weeks ago, we lost David Lynch, one of the most significant filmmakers and artists in general of the past 50 years. Obviously, you don't need me to go through his legacy, not least because it's been done over and over by more or less the entire population of the world by now. One obituary even called him one of the most important artists to ever live, which seems like the kind of thing that might need a few centuries to pass before it can be bandied around like that, but at the same time, I wouldn't argue. This is one of those deaths like David Bowie or Nelson Mandela or Bruce Forsyth that represents an absolute full stop on something that will never return. A door closing on part of history in some way. Which is to say, I would have felt like I'd failed somehow if I didn't acknowledge it in this programme. Well, did you know David Lynch made loads and loads of adverts? If you didn't before he died, you probably do now because they keep going on about it, but you may even have seen some of them in medias res and not known it. Stands to reason, really. Someone like Lynch couldn't always get big studios to back his projects for some bizarre reason, so doing commercials was a good way to make the odd bundle of cash that could go towards purchasing all that creamed corn, or fresh rabbit costumes, or bail money for Robert Blake. Lynch was first commissioned for a commercial shortly after Blue Velvet restarted his career. It was 1988 and the advert was for Calvin Klein's then new Obsession. The classic format of mannered black and white tableau of beautiful people talking bollocks was already established with the famous launch campaign 3 years earlier.
In the kingdom of passion the ruler is obsession. Calvin Klein's obsession.
Ah, the smell of it.
Lynch didn't exactly deviate from this format, but he did make it much more straightforward, which is almost the only time you can say that about him. Instead of gnomic bullshit about some woman delivered by pained-looking character actors, his series involved quotes from famous authors spoken in voiceover above relatively Route 1 footage of models kissing.
He knew that when he kissed this girl, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. At his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. Obsession, Calvin Klein.
As a bonus, the models are Benicio del Toro and Heather Graham, the latter of whom went on to work with Lynch again, and the former of whom, frankly, should have. The Lynchian touches are there, of course, the mixing between faces, and later, as Fitzgerald breaks out the floral imagery, a rose. The campaign also included this decidedly more dramatic Ernest Hemingway spot, which almost amounts to an adaptation of a single scene from The Sun Also Rises, and kind of makes you wish Lynch had filmed the entire book.
I lay awake thinking, and my mind jumping around, and then I couldn't keep away from it, and I started to think about bread. I was thinking about bread, and my mind started to go in sort of smooth waves. Then all of a sudden I started to cry. After a while it was better, and I lay in bed and listened to the heavy trams go by. And then I went to sleep. Obsession, Calvin Klein.
Note the skeletal tree. Lynch liked skeletal trees. Only the third one in the series, derived from Women in Love, almost looks like it could have been made by anyone. Almost.
Her fingers went over the mold of his face, over his features. How perfect and foreign he was. How dangerous. Her soul thrilled with complete knowledge. This was the glistening, forbidden apple. She kissed him, putting her fingers over his face, his eyes, over his ears to his neck. To know him, to gather him in by touch. Obsession for Men, Calvin Klein.
Of course, Calvin Klein fragrances are serious business. Well, they think they are. There wasn't much chance for Lynch to show his more playful side with that kind of brand. Fortunately, a few years later, the Japanese were on hand. They loved Twin Peaks as much as anyone. More than some, I dare say, since they probably never made the mistake of caring about the solution to the mystery. They also enjoyed patently daft ideas like coffee in a can. Hey, coffee was a motif in Twin Peaks, right? Let's do this thing.
Before Asami disappeared, she sent me this postcard from Great Northern. When they searched her room, all they found was this picture and this deer head.
Let's think about this over a coffee. No, Lucy? Incredible. You two have got to try this. It's rich. Man, oh man, this Georgia is damn fine coffee.
It's true.
What about this deer head?
Notice the symbol, Ken. I think you and I should take a drive. Big Ed's Gas Farm. Georgia.
Despite his being one of the most trustworthy characters in all of fiction, and the cast-iron endorsement of the Log Lady, I'm afraid I still don't believe Agent Cooper about this stuff being as good as real coffee. Or even as instant coffee. Probably superior to Mellow Birds, though. Anyway, this was actually a serial, featuring various Twin Peaks characters, so I kind of feel obligated to show every instalment.
Sameskar, a very rare Von Singer Weibel. Red snooker balls? I don't get it. Come on, let's grab a bite and a can of Georgia.
Agent Cooper?
Shelley, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. It's called Georgia coffee. Comes in a can. Tastes as good and rich as any cup of coffee I've ever had.
It's true. Are you Ken?
Yes?
A beautiful woman left this here for you.
Georgia ni makasero.
This might be the only good thing Major Namick ever made since Twin Peaks, apart from Twin Peaks The Return.
What do you think it means?
I don't know, Ken. Letter G. How about a couple of Georgia coffees while we think about it? Thank you, Lucy. Cooper, Hawk, you're gonna love Georgia coffee. It's brewed rich. Tastes incredible. Damn fine coffee, right?
Right.
It's true.
Agent Cooper, look what happens when I connect the pins.
The letter G. Good work, Andy. Hawk, what's under that last pin?
Glastonbury Grove.
Home of the Black Lodge.
Georgia ni makasero.
You might be feeling something very slightly off about the pace. And that'll be because, despite being in English, it's actually written to match the rhythms of the Japanese language. Subtitle down the side, you'll notice. The Japanese is very different to Western languages, being neither syllable-timed nor, like English, stress-timed, which is one of the many reasons the dialogue in anime and the like can seem vaguely alien. Notice the misspelling of Glastonbury Grove. No, really, I checked, it's actually spelt like the town in Somerset in the show itself, despite the stress on the word berry. And finally...
That's where I'll find Asami.
Watch.
The Black Lodge isn't in this world. Inside there's a red room. Asami.
Ken, 私はどうしたの？どこにいたの？
もう大丈夫だよ。Georgia.
Great idea, Ken. Brewed rich. Tastes incredible. Georgia's all around.
Georgia ni makasero.
That's actually more of an explanation of the Black Lodge than we ever got in the show, and it's still basically nothing. Please don't explain it to me in the comments. I have watched the show, and the film, and the bits that weren't in the film, and I understand it all to my own satisfaction, which is pretty much the best anyone can ask for. Anyway, Georgia coffee remains one of the most popular coffees in Japan, because those people are strange. Meanwhile, back in America, someone had the frankly brilliant brainwave of hiring David Lynch to make what amounted to a public information film, which is such a good idea, I'm surprised it only happened the once. Unless you count a spot for the American Cancer Society, which has disappeared off the face of the earth. And as an aside, the 1999 British anti-drinking and driving campaign had Mehdi Nouralzian doing a bloody good Lynch impression. But the master himself only ever went in for public scolding this once, for the New York equivalent of Keep Britain Tidy. The city had a rat problem at the time, and that kind of thing was grist to Lynch's mill. Well, if that hasn't left you with a fresh horror of littering, newly aghast at the very notion of so much as tipping your fag ash out on the tarmac, then I don't know what will. A lot of the adverts Lynch made were for fragrances, high-end ones from Dior and Yves Saint Laurent and the like, the kind where a model prances around in fashions, usually from the same house as the fragrance, sometimes encountering an Alain Delon lookalike for coy goings-on. Obviously Lynch wasn't hired for these because of his surrealist hypnagogic imagery or bizarre distortions of reality through camera work and editing. These adverts took advantage of his unhurried, carefully lit formalist side, and his frank appreciation of beautiful women, and how the camera could make them even more so. He also tended to bring his mate Angelo Badalamenti with him to provide the soundtrack. The fragrance ads can be much of a muchness, though. Sometimes only a film student or devotee of Lynch or Badalamenti would necessarily figure out their involvement. Others, however, could have been made by no one else, like this startling spot for Adidas. You know the concept of the runner's wall, where you've burned up almost all your body fat and the metabolism starts to panic, and the whole thing begins to feel like an exercise in raw survival that you feel like you're doomed to lose. Well, That's pretty much how it feels to me running 100 yards. Here there are several examples of Lynch's use of relatively primitive compositing techniques, even for 1993 when the thing was made. The mushroom clouds and lightning forks could have been more realistically blended with the runner, and indeed he could have been more realistically blended with the backgrounds, but Lynch wasn't interested in that. His approach was Brechtian. He wanted the artificiality, and he wanted you to notice it. That's how dreams look, after all. Not all the adverts Lynch made bore his stamp quite so vividly. In 1997 he made this extremely Route 1 advert for the Clear Blue pregnancy test. Now hearing that might make you picture any number of horrifying Razorhead references, but in fact you'd never have imagined this advert was one of his if you didn't know already.
When you're waiting to find out if you're pregnant or not, nothing else in the world matters until you know. Introducing Clear Blue Easy 1-minute pregnancy test, because only Clear Blue Easy gives you a clear yes or no in 1 minute.
Of course, once you do know, there are plenty of typical touches in there, such as being shot in black and white, a tortured, faintly film noir-styled woman gazing into a mirror, the mild surrealism of the watch. The most notable thing, however, is what it doesn't show. The woman looks at the stick and smiles at us in satisfaction. A typical ending shot for this kind of product, only we never get to see what she sees, the result of the test. Is she smiling because she's pregnant, or because she ain't? Usually we'd assume the former. In fact, usually we'd be told the former, but here the latter is suddenly an open possibility. And it's genuinely subversive in its subtle implication that a woman might have had sex for its own sake, which is, of course, the main thing that most anti-abortionists are actually against. Of course, it would have been almost unthinkable if Lynch had never made at least one advert for cigarettes, the things he loved most of all, although, sadly, it clearly wasn't mutual. In the late 90s, the Swiss brand Parisienne, then known as Parisienne People, commissioned a series of cinema adverts for major directors of the time. And I mean major. Apart from Lynch, there was the likes of the Coen brothers, Roman Polanski, Emir Kusturica, and Jean-Luc Godard, among others. They were given absolute carte blanche as long as the cigarettes showed up somewhere. Lynch's one was about as Lynch as it got. Filmed backwards, but making absolutely no more sense forwards. In fact, it's shot such a way as to render the whole concept of backwards and forwards entirely irrelevant. It's also set at what appears to be the gas station annexed by otherworldly forces in Twin Peaks. Feel free to work that into your personal canon. I'd leave out the Georgia adverts, though. I'm pretty sure they were non-canonical. And now we come to the elephant in the room. Probably the most famous advert David Lynch ever made. Not many people remember this, but it was heralded for the first couple of weeks before transmission in full, with these inexplicable blips appearing in the beginning, middle and end of certain commercial breaks.
Where are we?
At least I'm sure it was. I've never actually been able to find these blips online. The ones you're seeing are remade from memory. But I distinctly remember seeing them and wondering what in hell's name they could possibly signify. The mystery teaser is a fairly well-worn technique to drive up anticipation, and particularly popular in the late 90s as I recall. but it was particularly savvy of Sony to do it with an advert directed by David Lynch, adding yet another layer of confusion. The only wrinkle was that I, for one, was keenly aware that one of the biggest product launches yet seen was nigh. So when I saw these blips, I had no idea what the hell it could lead to in specific, but I did figure one thing: it probably had something to do with the PlayStation 2. And indeed it did. The sequel to the console that changed the game. The biggest new thing in video games that millennium, which admittedly was only a few months old. Its launch was bound to be massive. But I don't think anyone expected this.
Welcome to the third place.
PlayStation 2! The third place!
It's Lynch at his most Lynch, really. To the point of cliché if you feel like being unkind, but predictable Lynch is still like nothing else you'd ever see. And now you'll never see it again, so you can sod off. This is basically the Black Lodge in one of its silly moods. How it advertises the PS2, or anything else for that matter, is up for debate, but it certainly didn't hurt the damn thing. Here's one you might not have known was Lynch.
Motro. Symbology. Space. Do you speak Micra?
Yeah, you remember this campaign? An attempt in 2002 at relaunching the relatively stolid Nissan Micra as a sexy, modern, small car. The advert itself is actually relatively close to what passed for straightforward in 2002, to the extent that I, for one, never recognised it as Lynch.
Motro. Symbology. Symbol. Technology. Space. Spontaneous. Safe. Do you speak Micra?
He didn't usually go in for this kind of smooth, neon and chrome and skyscrapers future aesthetic. He tended to lean more towards the industrial, even the steampunk. His idea of a time machine was a copper kettle with David Bowie's soul inside. But there's still plenty of his trademarks in there if you're looking for them. A semi-ambient soundtrack, occasionally and randomly interrupted by white noise, for instance. Smoke and strobing everywhere. People dressed for film noir, albeit heavily blurred. I suspect and would like to think that Lynch wasn't responsible for the premise, though, involving fairly daft portmanteau being made out of arbitrary adjectives. Mind you, it did work better in French, German and Italian, and it's mostly the last word that lets the concept down. The first two are mostly universal, but when it came down to the last one, where the Italians had sigille, and even the Germans had the relatively aesthetic Comfagil, unprepossessing Old English had to settle for the downright asinine spafe.
Space. Do you speak Micra?
Do you talk bollocks? This is not a comprehensive overview by any means. There are plenty of others. Acres of fragrance commercials, for instance. Not to mention the short film Lady Blue Shanghai, made for Dior, for which they told him he could do whatever he liked as long as it wasn't too long and had both Shanghai and the bag they were trying to advertise in it. It did. Also Marion Cotillard, a blue rose, a not insignificant amount of smoke, and the concept of a woman in trouble. Then there was a set for Alka-Seltzer, which took a reasonably straightforward script and treated it like a horror movie. Some interstitials for the Sci-Fi Channel, ranging from gently amusing to eerily apocalyptic. An ad for Honda, which played with ideas of identity and determinism, and also there was a car in there somewhere. And a downright cute commercial for Barilla Pasta, in which Gerard Depardieu comforts a crying girl and then a hot chick. Very much the Lynch of the Straight Story rather than the Lynch of Lost Highway, even though it came out before either. And now, there'll never be any more. There'll be works by people influenced by him, which is pretty much everyone in some way or another, but nothing like David Lynch will ever come again. The book is closed. The oeuvre is complete, for better or worse. That's your lot. It's over. Which seems like a mistake when describing someone whose work was full of chronological circles and Mobius strip narratives where nothing seemed to be over. But it is. Then again, that's only one way of looking at it. And if we learned anything from David Lynch, and let's hope we have, it's that there's more than one way of looking at anything.
Never, oh never, nothing will die. The stream flows, the wind blows, the cloud fleets, the heart beats. Nothing will die.
Everyone, have a great day.